worked a lot with the 173rd Airborne Brigade. So they were ripping out, so they were leaving, we call it ripping out, and half the brigade had already left, went back to Italy, going to a place called Wanat. They ended up getting almost overrun. Lost about nine guys that I knew. I got to meet, had meals with them. And that was a shock. Witnessing, people in the hospitals at the chapel and go visit, just watching them fight for their lives. 90-something% of his body was charred. Just watching him end up passing away. But one thing that I'll never forget about that night is there's a young Afghan guy who worked in the hospital. I'm just seeing him kind of just mop up this blood on the ground, just like being angry, like just thinking to myself, I hope this guy knows that what this American passed away for, it was for him. So one of my best friends that I knew from Inpatient ended up going on a shooting spree, killed his ex-wife, basically her whole family. Hit 3 locations. Man, the shootings, like in Harleysville, and knowing some vets around, oh man, that's crazy. I got to take my dog out. So I grab my gun and just go out, like not knowing what's happening.
Right.
And then I get a call. I actually put the pieces together. I saw a Facebook, and I was like, oh man. I was like, in my head, I was like, oh shit. Like,
It was him.
It was him. And really within minutes, I get a call from this woman on the phone. And I was like, well, what's going on? And she's like, well, I can't tell you.
That's
I was like, well, I think I know what's going on. And there's no way I'm going to be able to drive up there, hang up the phone. A minute later, I get a call from Montgomery County detectives. We're here at your house. Like, oh yeah, I know you guys are coming. They're like, how do you know that we're coming to get you? And I was like, I don't know. Some lady called and like, well, we don't know who this lady is, but we're here to pick you up. And I'm like, I don't know like what I'm doing. And so I get into their car, and they actually drive me over to one of the locations. There's a survivor in the house, and it's like, here's boom. They went into the house, threw a flashbang grenade, and I'm hearing all this going on. Like, man, this is so familiar.
Rocking and rolling now. We're all synced up. Jim Dinardo here with Jonathan Bittner. John, hello. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome.
Very happy to be here.
Dancing on a Volcano episode 6, baby. You know what I mean? So, full disclosure, and we were talking about this a little bit before the interview, that, John's the first person that I haven't met face-to-face before a Volcano episode. So, but in the interest of getting to know a little bit about somebody's background and somebody's history before I interview them, I spent a little time looking at like what internet presence you have, right? So, Jonathan's a therapist specializing in PTSD. Certainly an effort dear to my heart. We lose too many guys.
Yes.
Another veteran as well. Thank you for your service, my brother.
Thank you for your service too.
We harass each other. We were joking a little bit on the way before. Dean's an Air Force vet. I'm a Navy vet. You were, saying sorry to both of us, which I fucking love. You know what I mean? Like, but we're like that, right? You know what I mean? But guys outside of our circle are not like that. Those guys can't say those things. We can crown eater all day long and say whatever the fuck we want. But in the end, all gave some gave fucking all.
That is 100%
there's a tremendous amount of respect that goes for all of that. And I don't give a fuck whether you worked the fucking chow hall and slung slop, or worked in the, recruiting depot, or you were in the shit. Now, obviously, guys who are in the shit, I give a little bit of extra fucking cred for. Bottom line is, all gave some gave all, and we're just a couple days past Veterans Day. Veterans Day used to be a very difficult day for me. Maybe not as difficult as Memorial Day, but difficult nonetheless. And, it wasn't as difficult this time. And I think it wasn't as difficult this time because of guys like you. Okay. 2011, 2012, I was fucking jammed up. and thinking about putting a bullet in my brain or jumping off the fucking Ben Franklin Bridge. And, PTSD had gotten me by the fucking nuts. And I was in a bad place. And, I went to the VA and I walked into the front desk. I'll never forget, too. The guy who worked behind the counter at the front desk was also studying to be a therapist, so he was filling in. And I walked in the door, my fucking hair on fire, bro. And I was like, he said, "Hey, can I help you?" And I said, "Yeah." He asked me, I forget what qualifying questions or whatever he asked me. And then I started to tell him like what my background was. And he said, whoa. Hang on a second, my brother. He said, "I'm not going to say what you're saying to me isn't important." He says, "Because I'm sure it is." He said, "But let's do ourselves a favor and let's unpack it in front of somebody that's prepared to handle you and what you're saying."
And that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
And I had a very similar experience my first time at the
I'm so
VA,
thankful for that, because I would have... The thing that I didn't understand about post-traumatic stress disorder is, to other people it's a story, but when I fucking unpack it, I live it.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I start telling stories and, other people are like, whoa, but my hair's standing up on my arms because I'm having a physical fucking response to it.
Because you lived it. You went through it, and
Right.
that's the response that you're associating with it.
So, so I have a lot of respect for people that, that do what you do. Even a little bit more so for people who have served who do what you do. Mm. My therapist now, right, is a Marine Corps vet. He's a crown eater, right? You know what I mean? I love him, though.
And they just had the Marine Corps birthday the other day?
He's the man.
Yeah.
Like, I fucking love him, dude. You know what I mean? Because we can have deep conversations and we can just dispose of all the bullshit. His predecessor I saw for a year. She wasn't a veteran. And, and she was a EMDR, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. We never really connected. I saw this cat, and within a week, I was like, "You're my fucking dude."
That's really the biggest thing when it comes to therapy, is having a therapist that you feel connected to, that you can trust. Because if you don't feel that, you're not going to open up.
Right. So let's talk a bit about your background. So where are you? You were originally from Pennsylvania? Where are you from?
Yeah, so originally born in Philadelphia. My family moved out.
What part of Philly?
So my family is originally from the Northeast. My grandparents lived in Mount Airy.
Okay.
So my whole family was born and raised, at least my siblings. My dad's originally from the Pittsburgh area. My mom went to school out that way. They met when my dad was in the Marine Corps, right before he shipped off to Okinawa back in the 60s.
Okay.
They got married, I guess, shortly after that, and after my dad got out of the military, moved to Philadelphia and married my mom.
Wow. Still together?
Still together. I believe it's probably been over 50 years now.
Wow.
So they just turned 75. So if they're watching this, happy birthday.
Oh, there we go. Happy birthday. He's 75. 75.
So both of them are 75 years old.
Wow, that's impressive. Okay, so brothers, sisters?
So I have 3 brothers and a sister. I have a twin brother.
Okay, twin brother, and how are you spanned out? Are you in the young side?
So we are the youngest.
Okay.
So my oldest brother, I'm really bad at ages. I believe he's 50-something now.
Okay.
And then my sister is the next one. She is maybe around 48. And my next brother up is in the mid or low, maybe 43.
Okay.
And then my twin brother and I are 37 now.
Okay.
37, I think. I forget. You know how it is. The older you get, you just kind of forget how old you are.
Well, we don't think about our age.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, it behooves me not to think about my age right now. You know what I mean? So,
whatever helps you.
Yeah, no doubt. So mom and dad still, what did dad do?
So my dad, once he got out of the Marine Corps after his, I think, 4 years in, got into the computer world. So he's retired now, but worked for many years in, I think it was network security, worked for a big company in the area for over 20 years and got laid off. They shipped his job to India. and then he was unemployed for a little bit, got another job, finished out, retired, and that's what he did for pretty much his whole career.
Was mom a stay-at-home mom, or did she work too?
My mom stayed home a little bit. Then she ended up, they called it a companion.
Okay.
So she's retired now, but what she did was worked at a retirement home, taking care of old people. So families would hire her privately on the outside to come take care of their relatives. So she would, over the years, I could probably think of 10, 15 people that she took care of. So I remember just growing up as a little kid, just being drugged in the summers to the retirement home a couple days a week, pushing wheelchairs, taking care of the older individuals. But it's an experience that I wouldn't trade for anything.
You come from a family of service.
We definitely do.
Right. I understand that.
Yeah.
I do understand that. So, all right. So let's play forward. So Northeast high school, right? You know what I mean? Like, what was it like being a kid for you? I mean, did you assimilate well, or?
So I was out already in the suburbs by that time. So my family, all my siblings ended up in this small little private school in Bucks County.
Okay.
Just not a good experience for me.
Okay.
So I went there all the way through 8th grade.
Okay.
I fought with my parents so much to get pulled out of that school. So 9th grade, I was out of.
Well, why did you want to get pulled out? You just didn't fit in there.
So I didn't really necessarily fit in. I'm somebody who likes to break the rules, not follow things. On the other hand, I really struggled academically.
Okay.
So the private school, very small school, they didn't really necessarily have the means or the support to help individuals who were maybe not as academically inclined as the other students.
It's funny how, nor was I, I'm dyslexic and, and all those other things. And you know what I mean? Like I'm a, art college dropout cause I got high, et cetera, right? So, not academically that inclined, but ultimately, and certainly there's an old saying that says, if you're the smartest guy in the room, you're in the wrong room. And I always believe that to be true. But at the same time, I've struggled with low self-esteem and low self-worth my whole life, right? And, and I told you earlier when we were talking about, I'm a Brene Brown fan. And one of the things she likes to say is the story that I'm telling myself is. To preclude the story that I'm telling myself, so I recognize the story that I'm telling myself is.
Yes.
And I undermine myself often, you know what I mean? Like, that I'm not as intelligent as I think I am, or I'm not as right, you know what I mean? And come to find that, I have enough intelligence to be able to navigate my way through most stuff.
And that's really all you need. And I had a very similar experience just growing up. And the difference, right, with my twin brother and I, he was excelled in school. I remember at my school, they would give out these folders every Friday with all the schoolwork that was completed that week, and you need a parent's signature, and then you would have to bring it back.
And you had to come home with you had to do the black sheep walk in with your folder.
And I remember telling my brother, hey, don't show mom and dad till Sunday night.
Right.
And we had the same work that was due. He had A's, B's. I probably had some C's, D's, and F's.
Right, right.
And especially when report cards came, those had to be signed by your parents too. There was no way to escape it.
Right.
And so I remember many conversations with my brother about that.
Okay. And are you close with all your brothers and sisters now? Or?
Somewhat. So my oldest brother lives in Oklahoma. He moved down there in 2001.
Okay.
Got married, had a couple kids, and with that age gap, there was a lot of just differences, especially with the age.
Right, right.
We're really close. We text a lot. We're into the same music, which is so interesting.
What kind of music?
A lot of metalcore.
Okay.
So a lot of like screaming type of music.
Cool.
Really aggressive music and
music to kick a door into.
Definitely music to kick a door into.
I like it.
And so we've had that connection, and he'll come up, and we've gone to shows. I've gone down to Oklahoma.
Right.
go to Oklahoma City, see a couple shows down there.
Right.
My sister, the next one, we're close. She works in the mental health field too, but with kids. So she's a licensed social worker in New Jersey.
Okay.
Works a lot with kids. So we have a really good relationship. My next brother, Matt, we really struggled in a relationship over the years. I think he was in a spot where he was the youngest and thought that he was going to be the last kid. Apparently, they were promised a dog. And then when my twin brother and I were born, well, there went the dog. So I think he really held it against us for quite some time.
Unfortunately, we end up being the dog.
Yeah. So, and I've been really headstrong over the years. I really grew up just kind of doing my own thing.
Right.
And I think that really caused me to butt heads with some of my siblings, and especially my parents when I was younger.
Now, so I always think about, you know what I mean? Like there's all these different eras that have to do with change in this country.
Yes.
Right. Like I tell people all the time that, you know, I was a patriot before it was fashionable to be a patriot. You know what I mean? Like when I started the first Patriot, it was the late 1990s. Right. You know what I mean? And then, you know, we got socked in the chops, you know, September 11th in 2001. And, you know, suddenly everybody had a flag hanging out their front door. And then, you know what I mean? And economically we went through a shift, but at least in terms of, you know, being patriot suddenly became more fashionable. But for me, I was always patriot, like long before that, you know what I mean? Like, so, but, one thing it did for me was the first thing I did was, you know, how many more years I'm already past my inactive reserve. Are they gonna, you know what I mean? Like I was with a helicopter squadron, combat search and rescue, and anti-submarine warfare. So I was like, you know, and I was a tech, like I'm a flight deck rat, like, you know what I mean? I'm just trying to stay alive, you know what I mean? And, you know, and part of me was like, can I go back? You know what I mean? Like, you know, will they take me at Willow Grove Naval Air Station? Like, what do I do? Like, what do I do? Like, immediately was like, you know, my father was a fire chief. My mom was captain of the ambulance squad at the same fire company. You know what I mean? Like, you know, he was a hazmat specialist for the state of Pennsylvania, one of the first ones to, you know, to pioneer programs for hazmat in Pennsylvania. So, you know, I came from, you know, to me, it was like my brother was a volunteer firefighter from the age of 16. So was I before I went into service. I was a junior firefighter before art college even. So to me, it was part of it was, you know, just feeling like, you know, like it hit personally, you know, not just hit us all as Americans, but, you know, the men and women who died trying to rescue others really, you know, like there was a secondary level of, you know, impact that had. So now you went in 2005, right?
Yes.
Okay, right. And you deployed in 2007, right?
2007, towards the end of 2007 and 2008.
Now, I don't know what they call it in the Army. I know in the Marine Corps it's MOS. What do they call it?
MOS.
Is it MOS
yes.
for you guys too?
Yes.
Okay, so what was your specialty?
So I was actually what they consider a chaplain assistant. So I had very slim pickings. So growing up, I had a lot of ear infections, which turned into I had tubes in my ears, which then caused some hearing loss. And so my entrance into the military was just a little bit difficulty, needing to have a waiver, like a medical waiver for hearing loss, which really ended up, I guess, getting me out of a lot of options. So it was very few options.
Yeah, but it's actually really compelling. You know what I mean? Like, and the reason why I think is that, okay, so here's something I learned about this show, right? So we've shot some different episodes with some people, and what I found is that when we dance on the Volcano, because I'm an empath, I fucking dance with you.
Yes.
Right? So we did a couple episodes they got really hardcore. And afterwards, I said to Dean, like the day afterwards, I was like, am I even going to fucking do this anymore? You know what I mean? Because it was like, I was emotionally fucking hungover, like for real. Like it took something out of me too. Not to mention the person that I sat with. And I think about that conversation that was had in, when I walked into the VA for the first time, right? That, that there's something to be said for the impact of unpacking.
Yes.
Right. You know what I mean? That when you do that, you know what I mean? Like, in certain ways you relive. Right. And I think about somebody like you, right? Like you can, and again, you'd be like, oh, well, it limited my ability to be able, oh, fuck no.
Yes.
Like in some ways, yes. Okay. Because maybe, you might not necessarily have a bullet whiz past your head, right? But immediately you've got to deal with the impact of the guy who does.
Yes.
Right.
And there was a mixture of both. And
oh, really?
So
okay. So now, did you deploy in combat situations?
Yeah, so I deployed in 07 and 08 to Afghanistan.
So what was that fucking like?
So it was interesting. So I was actually in the Guard. So, what they call citizen soldiers, right? But I spent
my turn.
I spent most of my time on active duty.
Right.
It was really fascinating, and we can get into this in a little bit, just how different and how impactful like coming home from deployment to a combat zone is. But as far as the deployment itself, just have been out of high school. So I graduated high school in 2006. Went to basic training right after graduation. And then I came back, I think it was right before Christmas. Within a couple months, I actually had orders to go on a peacekeeping mission to the Sinai. To Egypt.
Okay.
And so they were looking for a chaplain assistant to go, and there was 2 in my unit, in my battalion. Typically, there's 1 per chaplain. So kind of a background for listeners who are unfamiliar with chaplain assistants. So it's actually against the Geneva Convention for chaplains to carry weapons. They're considered non-combatants. And so they, at least on the Army, I think the Air Force side of obviously is a little bit different, and the Navy I think has some on the Navy chaplains, but we're also like for personal protection for chaplains. So it's interesting. So there's usually 1 per battalion. Typically there's supposed to be a chaplain. My battalion did not have a chaplain, so we kind of just got given to whatever section. So ended up with the commo guys a lot, just working with them. And then within 4 months of being out of basic training, they got called into a huddle, and they're like, hey, you guys are going to the Sinai with a CAV unit out of Philadelphia. Right. And I was like, a little bit disappointed. I really wanted to deploy to a combat zone. And then what ended up happening, couple months later, my buddy, who was also the chaplain assistant, actually got pulled to go to Afghanistan, which then kind of pissed me off a little bit more because that's where I wanted to end up. So we actually had a little bit of a huddle and said, hey, like, do you really want to go to Afghanistan? He had a brother who was in Iraq and had been wounded over there. He didn't necessarily want to go to Afghanistan. He wanted to go to the Sinai. So we kind of pulled a switcheroo. Actually,
it's funny because you're a therapist. I'll have your fucking head examined. You know what I'm saying? Like, because you know what I mean. Like, voluntarily, Afghanistan is not statistically probably not the place a lot of people choose to go.
Yeah, definitely not. But it was ever since I was a kid. Like, I knew I wanted to go to war. I wanted to be in the military.
Right.
And this started. I have uncles that were in Vietnam. My great grandfather was in World War I. My great uncle was in World War II in Korea, I believe.
Now, you said you were a reservist to start, right?
Yes.
So it's funny how some people, when they sign up for the reserves, don't realize that aspect of the reserves that means that you might not be a fucking reservist. Like, you might be fucking active. You know what I mean? And, at least some people that I've talked to, you know what I mean? Like, that was a fucking serious shocker. Like, it was a way for me to get my school taken care of and, that type of thing. And the next thing you know, you're standing there with a fucking rifle and you're, you know what I mean? And you're shipping out and they're like, wait a minute, like, this isn't what I signed up for. Oh, no. Yes, it is. It's exactly what you fucking signed up for.
And it's so interesting because my recruiter told the truth on everything. Shocker, right?
That's rare.
Recruiters
That's
are
rare.
very rare that they tell the truth. But he would actually never meet with me first unless he came to my house to meet with my parents first.
Okay.
So stand-up dude, still in touch with him to this day. But he
That's
said the
fucking cool.
question isn't if you're going to get deployed, it's when.
Right.
And so he was very, very clear. So the Pennsylvania National Guard, on a side note, it was one of the most deployed units in the National Guard. They had a cycle probably about every other year deploying to a
Now, when
combat
you
zone.
rotated out, where did you end up in Afghanistan first?
So I was in eastern Afghanistan.
Okay. So for somebody that doesn't have a huge amount of Afghanistan familiarity, what city or town did you, what air base did you land in?
So we landed flying into the country in Bagram.
Okay, Bagram.
So I was only there for a very short time. They moved us. So the battalion that I was with, the 3rd 103rd Armor, was actually a combination between an armor unit and an infantry unit. 2 battalions, and there were some field artillery dudes in the mix. They split us up all throughout the country of Afghanistan.
So you got sprinkled around.
We got sprinkled around. So Afghanistan is roughly the size of Texas, which... you look on a map, it looks like it's the smallest country in the world.
Yeah, it's
but
huge.
it really is about the size of Texas.
Texas
which, again,
is big as shit.
Is not huge in itself.
But it's big.
Yes.
Yeah, it's big. And it's the terrain's very unforgiving.
Very unforgiving. And it's such an interesting country. So they had us sprinkled all around. I think it was about 15 different FOBs from my memory.
Right.
And the job of the chaplain in the battalion was to visit every single FOB and outpost that we had troops.
Woo!
So
you got a cross section of a little bit of a taste of what
cross-section.
everybody was going through.
And it was amazing. So eastern Afghanistan, a little bit north, all the way down south to Kandahar, all the way out west near Iran. It's literally every part of the country. So Rocky Mountain, foresty areas, down to the desert-like areas, down south and out west. And
were there some areas that were definitely more in the shit than others that you found,
Yes.
and some areas that were a little bit more laid back?
So eastern Afghanistan was really the hot spot. And just a little bit of background, too. 2007 is really when I would say that the war in Afghanistan kicked off.
Right.
After the initial invasion in 2001, 2002, not much was really going on. Sure, there was some fighting going on.
What would you say was the reason for the transition that heated it up in 2007? Like,
So
what
the
was your
Taliban
observation?
made a comeback.
Right.
They had been announcing previous year that we're coming back.
What did LL Cool J say? Don't call it a comeback. I've been here for years.
Yeah, and they've literally. So Afghanistan and the Taliban, they understood that it's like a waiting game.
Right.
And so I guess 2007 is when they figured
they
it
waited
out.
they waited their ass the whole way through.
The whole
Right.
way through.
Well, they had that experience from the Russians.
Yes.
They knew that sooner or later, it's a war of attrition.
Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So 2007, and so in Afghanistan, there's a fighting season. So what they do is they would retreat back into Pakistan.
When you say fighting season, they go back to their families in
Pakistan.
In the okay.
Yeah, so they would all head back into Pakistan during the winter months because the valleys would be snow covered, and it makes access difficult to go back and forth between the two countries.
Right.
So
there was pretty much an open door policy between Pakistan and Afghanistan.
So winters it's pretty quiet. Then once it starts getting warmer, the snow melts and the passes, they come right back in.
Right.
So we landed right before things kicked off.
Right when things really started to heat up, huh?
Yes.
So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about that. So what was the first shock? And what I mean by shock was first thing that you didn't expect. I mean, we don't have to get to the edge of the volcano yet, but you arrive, you fly into Bagram, right? And then you're like, okay, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
this is my gig for real.
Yeah.
This is why I'm here, right? You know what I mean? Like I'm not allowed to carry a rifle because of Geneva Convention, right? Were you allowed to?
Chaplains cannot.
Okay.
So they're assistants, and that's why we're there. Is that
So
protection.
technically you're a chaplain's assistant, right?
We call it in the field the most non-religious religious job. Most people think when they hear chaplain assistant, like a chaplain, and we are far from chaplains.
Right.
It's a very small MOS. Most dudes on active duty end up in special forces units, or other special operations, doing some really cool stuff.
Right.
So I have a weapon. I have to know how to fire and hit what I'm shooting at, because if the chaplain's life is in danger, somebody's got to protect them.
Right. Right. Okay. But they only give him one. And
Only one, and that is me.
That's you.
So it's a very important role.
Okay.
So we landed in, I believe it was like February or March, in Bagram. Got hit that night. Just a couple rockets. Bagram is just a huge air base. Nothing really crazy about that. It's just what it is.
Now, is most of your visitation relegated to the bases or the areas, or are you sometimes out in the field meeting with people, out in town meeting with people? I mean, where is the chaplain's interface most likely put him, and then where does that put you?
So it puts me with him where he ends up in meetings with the locals.
Okay, so right, okay, so there's some of that going on too.
A little bit of that. Just
that's got to
of
be
the
fucking
religious
tense.
It's intense too, because the other piece of this that I don't think people realize is that a lot of the chaplains, and I think this was 100% true, but a lot of them had prices on their heads just because they were like Christian chaplains.
Right.
And a lot of the Taliban, I guess, could have made a lot of money by killing one of them. So it was just a really an interesting perspective.
Jesus.
That not a lot of people really kind of understood or thought about.
Did they give you a translator or no?
Sometimes if we were out on missions where we needed one.
Right.
So usually like the battalion commander had a...
Did you find yourself going out on ops with...
I went out all the time. So that was a fun thing. So oftentimes, we traveled nonstop. So most of the time we'd be gone 2-3 weeks. I was living out of like a little backpack. I would have like one uniform rolled up, stuffed in there, like literally a little travel pillow that you would probably get on an airplane, and half a sleeping bag, and I that was what I traveled with all the time.
Are you still in contact with, how many different chaplains did you have over that time?
Just one.
Just one. But are you still in contact with that chaplain?
I saw him a couple of years ago. We talk every once in a while on LinkedIn.
Are you fond of him?
I am. He's a really good dude.
Yeah, that's all.
He was somebody else who kind of volunteered for that deployment.
Right.
So.
Right. Wow. All right. So you're there. I remember reading at some point. So I did a little like cross reading, right? So you were in Afghanistan, it said, for a year, and then you got rotated back because you got injured.
So I ended up just leaving after our deployment ended. So we were deployed from December to December.
Oh, okay.
And then I started to have a lot of mental health issues during the deployment. So a lot was going on. So kind of go back to your previous question. The moment that was kind of like an oh shit type of moment for me was a couple months after I had actually gone out, supposed to do a random patrol with some of the guys, one of the elements, and we were actually tasked for QRF, which is Quick Reaction Force. And there was an MP element, an active duty element that was staying on our FOB, which is a base. And they ended up getting ambushed, like a pretty close ambush. They were out on patrol with the AMP, the Afghan National Police. And just meters off the road, couple RPGs, hit the Afghan police. We got called out for QRF. So we were, again, scheduled just go on a routine patrol later that night, and everybody starts grabbing their stuff. I grab my body armor, my weapon, and we head out.
Now, in that case, the chaplain stays back, and
Yes,
it's just
he
you
stays
and
back.
you and a squad,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
And which
you're not
I'm-
like, hey, come
yeah.
on, you got to come with us. It's
Which
about to get hot.
which I'm
we could
really-
use
yeah.
Jesus, honestly, because you come, you
I'm
come with
really-
us if you want, you know.
I'm really fortunate because he allowed me to have the experiences that I wanted.
Right, right.
Have,
Yeah, I would have felt
Yeah.
fucking cheated too. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, I don't want to be in the rear with the fucking gear when the shit goes down. You know what I mean? I don't want to be one of those guys.
Yeah, so kind of continue with that story is we're driving out to whatever's going on, and there's a Highway 1 or Route 1
Okay.
is like the main stretch of highway that goes through Afghanistan. Pretty much the only paved set of roads, so a lot of ambushes happen, a lot of IEDs.
Right.
And we just get to the highway. It was probably like 15, 20-minute drive and traffic, which is a trigger for a lot of vets.
Yeah, because I don't
combat
want to be
vets.
not fucking moving. Right? You know what I mean? Like, that makes me way more than
Yes.
fucking talk. Yeah, like, I want to be fucking hauling ass
Yeah.
at all times. Right? I understand that.
So
Okay.
it's dark. We
Okay.
we don't see anything. We don't drive with lights on in the Humvees. Everybody's
Right.
got night vision on. So we come up and we see all the cars just stopped on the road, people hanging out, walking around, and go around that. We get to the ambush spot, and some of the Afghan police are dead. One guy's leg was blown off, and the vehicle burned, so his foot was kind of glued or melted to the gas pedal of the vehicle. It was just really a rough night for the RMPs. They
Okay.
just really struggle with that ambush. And just driving back, it was something that you'd see kind of out of the movie. So just being there around the ambush site, burned out vehicles, helicopters just flying in the air, trying to chase
Shit
down
got
the dudes.
real.
It got real. And it was,
There it is. See it?
that's it.
There it is. Okay.
And it was just a really out of this body experience.
Right.
And we picked them up, secured them, followed them back to the base. I remember we got to some kind of field, I think maybe a potato field or something, and the MPs are out in front of us. All of a sudden they stop and they start chasing this dude down in the field, and just watching this stuff. It's like, man, this is like kind of exciting.
Right.
I was 20 years old at
I was
this
just going to ask you
time.
how old were you?
Yeah,
Right,
so I
right.
turned 21 over there.
Right.
But yeah, so it was just exciting to watch that. But then getting back, they had the after action review, and just like seeing the MPs in tears, and it was just like, what are you guys like crying about? This is like war. Like, this is really what happens.
So, remember I told you, like, my first therapist, right? So,
Yes.
he was a brown water non-vet.
Yeah.
So, fast water patrol boat vet. So, shot some 8-year-old Vietnamese kid in the chest, holding an AK, hiding an AK. You know what I mean? So, he had some fucking stories too. And, one of the things that, even when I arrived at the VA, you know what I mean? I was in a real bad flight deck crash. So, you know what I mean? Like, but to me, it was like PTSD was what other people experienced.
Yes.
Right? You know what I mean? Like, it's because machismo. You know what I mean? Like, fuck that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, that's for the guy that's, missing an arm, missing a leg, missing his head, missing an eye. You know what I mean? Not for me. And what I didn't realize was that the impact of how it manifests itself in your life. You know what I mean? When I realized, okay, at fucking 20, and I'm sure you can fucking relate to this, I'm fucking invincible.
Yes.
Like, I am fucking, you know what I mean? I'm there, you know what I mean? Like, I'm in very dangerous environments, and so, right? And then when you see people don't come away from this thing alive, you realize, wait a minute. But you know what? In the immediacy, it doesn't click.
Yeah.
It takes time.
And it really doesn't click. And it didn't even click during or after this incident. It was just, I looked at it as like, oh, some Afghan dudes got killed and wounded.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
This is war.
Right.
And so that experience, I don't think really came to affect me until years later.
Right.
But there was other experiences, just getting rocketed. So I was down in Kandahar Air Base. And we were sleeping in the middle of the night. And like I've been hit a couple times before that on smaller bases. So
Right.
like Kandahar Airfield is almost like a city.
Right. Yeah, it's big.
And so you could get hit and on one end and not
even know it.
necessarily know it. And so I'm sleeping and hear some boom, boom, boom. And it hit what they call the shit pond. So there's like this little pond where all the sewage would go, probably a couple hundred like meters from where I'm sleeping. Right. And I'm like, all right, whatever.
Yeah, but enough to know that
Not
a couple
enough
hundred
to
meters,
know.
you know, the
I go
shit
back-
pond is,
yes.
you're in the shit.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And so I roll back, go back to sleep. And then the chaplain assistant that we knew and had met comes knocking on the door like, hey, we have to go to the bunkers. And it's like, well, it's already over. Like, if you hear it, like, you're okay. And so
Right.
and that was a difference of being in a big
but
base.
you know, but that's an interesting thing that you said, because the parallel of that is if you don't hear it, you're not fucking okay.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And talk about a level of additional tension that you have to carry.
Yes.
That, you know, that if you don't hear it, it's on the way. Mm-hmm. I know a guy that I'm connected to on LinkedIn. He's a former Army artillery officer. And I saw a post that he made a few days ago about artillery. And it was like, you know what I mean? Come on, we got to be the forward tip of the spear. It was a bunch of these guys getting ready to rock. He was like, as soon as the artillery guys get ready, fucking killing all the enemy, then we can roll up in there. And I thought, well, I mean, that's a little bit of a, you know, that's a little dismissive to the guys who are at the tip of the spear. But that being said, if you're on the other side and it's artillery or it's rockets, you know, and you realize that there is nothing that can be done.
Yeah.
Right?
You're just
at the mercy of wherever it hits.
Yeah.
And, you know, and that was actually something that, you know, something that my first therapist said to me that really caught me. He said that, you know, and you know, it was the same thing for me. It was just that you develop a tension and a threat assessment meter that's not like other people.
Yeah.
Like, and everywhere that I went after that was like I was looking around at what could possibly, you know, who could possibly be a threat or what could possibly be a threat. And most other people were like, what's wrong?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So now, so you were there for, you said you rotated back after a year.
Yes.
Right? So when you got back, right, what's that feel like?
So it was hard and kind of going back a little bit. It's like I lost a lot of friends on that deployment.
Yeah. How many did your, okay. So, you know, you went over with battalion, right?
Yes.
How many casualties did your battalion take?
Our battalion only lost, I believe it was 3.
3 too many.
But what happened is, so we were on a, most of the battalion was connected with Air Force and Navy.
Okay.
They were called PRTs, so Providential Reconstruction Teams.
Right.
So the Navy and Air Force trained up with us,
Right.
with the Army dudes. And so they were like involved in construction projects throughout the country. So they were really
Hearts and
integrated
minds.
as part of us. And I think
Right.
they lost about 9.
Wow.
So it was like a lot of loss.
Yeah, that is a lot of loss.
Plus a suicide that really rocked me.
Was it somebody
there.
you knew?
Yeah, a really good buddy of mine. So in June, it was kind of like this couple month period. So the first casualty that we had was a lieutenant, Lieutenant DePrimo. And he was killed, IED went off and took his life. And then it was like, felt like it was like a couple months later that one of my best friends, Specialist Holland, Derek Holland, was killed in an IED blast that took a life of, there was a reservist, a Major Haggerty, and then it took the limb off of, the leg off one of my buddies, Earl, and then there was a couple other individuals killed during that blast. And then shortly after that, so I got to know a lot of the 173rd Airborne guys. I'm sorry, I'm going back a little bit, but I think there's
rewind
a lot
anywhere you want, my brother.
I really want to kind of dig into this a little bit because it really sets up for when I came home. So we worked a lot. The chaplain and I worked a lot with the 173rd Airborne Brigade. They were out of Germany and Vicenza, Italy. So we got to see a lot of those guys a lot.
Right.
So they were ripping out. So they were leaving. We call it ripping out. Partway about June, July, they were leaving. So we had become really good friends with a battalion there. And half the brigade had already left, went back to Italy. And in July, these guys ended up going to a place called Wanat. And they ended up getting almost overrun. Lost about nine guys that I knew. I got to meet, had meals with them. And that was a shock. Losing those 9 guys, but knowing like they weren't even supposed to be there. And half the brigade was already home when this took place. So that was a shock. That was really difficult. Just dealing a lot with death and just witnessing, people in the hospitals at the chapel and go visit, just watching them fight for their lives, like in the operating rooms, like where the surgeons are trying to save their lives from, IED blasts where 90-something% of their bodies are burned. Like I still have in
and
my
just
mind,
another one of those things that you can't really
and that's
protect
where,
yourself
and that's
from.
where things started to shift. And like I don't want to get into too much details about what it's like, but just being in the hospital and watching this specific individual that I remember clear as day in my head, he had been blown up. And 90-something% of his body was charred. Just watching him end up passing away, just blood all over. They tried to infuse him with blood, but it just kept coming out of his body, and they ended up calling it. And he ended up passing away. But one thing that I'll never forget about that night is there's a young Afghan guy who worked in the hospital. Obviously trusted. I'm sure he had to get a lot of background checks just to make sure he's like on the up and up. But I'll never forget just watching it and just seeing him in the room after this guy had already expired. I'm just seeing him kind of just mop up this blood on the ground, just like being angry, like just thinking to myself, I hope this guy knows that what this American passed away for, it was for him. And it's like, out of this anger and resentment and this bitterness, just being in the place where it's like just kind of pointing fingers, at least on the inside, to this guy. It's like, I hope he remembers this forever. Which, looking back, right, it's like, this isn't something that I would want people to remember, because it's traumatic. It's a lot of trauma. And kind of fast forward, one of my best friends had taken his life on that deployment. And it was so difficult. And he ended up, because like I said earlier, we traveled all the time. I was burned out from traveling. By this time, I was starting to have a lot of symptoms of PTSD, not being able to sleep. I was on meds at the time. They had combat stress teams on the Air Force side who would come around, and we worked a lot with them, the chaplain and we got to travel with them a little bit, but started getting some medication and just a little bit of therapy with them. And it was August, towards the end of August, where one of my best friends, Jonathan Bittner, we used to just do tower guard all the time together. Like I would make sure if he was on guard duty, I'd relieve whoever he was with, just so we could hang out, smoke cigarettes in the towers, and just really have a good time. And we came back from traveling for a couple weeks and landed. It was at night, and just landing, and he took care of a lot of the water on the little fob that we were at, just making sure everything was stocked. And I got off the helicopter, and just seeing him just quiet, and I was like, hey, what's going on? And weeks prior, he had talked to me about he was struggling with mental health, and I just kind of laughed it off, like, hey, we're going home. Like, everything's going to be good. He had talked to me about, hey, maybe I'll need some medication or something. It's like, dude, you're good. Like,
do you think part of it also was maybe the stress of going home?
Part of
knowing that I remember that we talked about that one point where
Yeah.
where Veterans Day and Memorial Day were difficult for me. And
Yes.
part of it was because you were around all these people that were just completely fucking oblivious
Yeah.
to like the sacrifice that others had made. And part of where I got so jammed up sometimes was like, you don't fucking understand.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Well, even before you get back, you know, maybe even recognizing that, wait a minute.
Yeah. And it was hard. And so that was, again, probably maybe a month before. So fast forward, I'm getting off the helicopter one night. I see him just down. I'm like, yo, what's up? And that was it. I didn't say anything else. And I think it was like a couple days later, he ended up shooting himself. And this was something I
Sorry
held
for your loss,
on.
brother.
Thank you. Like I held on to this for years. And I blame myself.
Yeah, what could I have What could I have
Yeah.
said?
Yeah.
Could I have done anything differently? But
was
it's
like,
not
oh,
like
he
he said, "Hey, I'm
asked."
gonna
Yeah.
fucking
Yeah.
off myself." You know, stop me.
Yeah.
You know?
And he didn't. But it's like at that time, I wasn't able to recognize it. There'd been a lot of other losses on top of that, some mass casualty incidents that I was involved with, or not actually with the mass casualty, like dealing with the after effects of carrying stretchers, seeing a lot of death, a lot of wounded stuff. So this was in August, and after that, it like things kind of settled down a little bit over there. It started to get colder. The fighting season was about to end, and we left
Everybody's going
around
back to Pakistan.
November.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. So you rotate back,
yeah.
right? And what's that like?
It's difficult. So we ripped through Fort Bragg, which I
Okay.
don't know. I think it's called Fort Liberty or something
Right,
now,
right.
North Carolina. And a lot of medical stuff. So you come back, and the rumor is don't say that you have any, or the word on the street is don't say that you have anything wrong. Because if you say that you got something wrong, they're going to keep you. And the
Right.
last thing that we want to do is stay there and not be able to go home.
You got to wonder where the rumors come from.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the things that I believe I was told or not told during transition, right? Even transition out of the military, transition assistance program or whatever, was limited assistance depending on what narrative they wanted to feed you. In terms of, you know, don't say it. You got to wonder whether don't say anything is so that it's not in your medical record, so that when you get out, you know what I mean, you can't claim against.
Yeah.
Right? You know what I
It-
mean?
it's
Like,
a-
you know, it's
yeah.
almost like there's a fucking underlying fight. It's the reason why, you know, I went from, why I became, you know, and maybe not to evangelize to the level that you have. I mean, I followed your background enough to see some of the things you've been involved in, but just to, you know, capture a fucking veteran on the street or a potential veteran on the street, not knowing whether or not he's real or not, and ask him, you know what I mean, like where his VA fucking ID card is, for Christ's sake. Because I was fucking suicidal, and I didn't know that the VA would take care of me because nobody fucking told me. I went through TAP class, and nobody told me that there was you know what I mean? Like they were like, oh, I actually went to a VA outreach in East Norton. Talked to a Marine Corps guy. He was a therapist.
Okay. He's probably the therapist that I had.
Yeah, what was his name?
Alan?
Yeah. Cool. He was like, you know, I was like, you know, I got so bad that I went to the hospital and I went through the thing, and then they sent me a bill for like 10 G's or something. And there was no way on earth I was paying that $10,000 bill. And when I went and saw him, he was like, you know that if you were like registered with the VA or whatever, they could have submitted that bill to the VA, and the VA would have worked it out with them. And I was like,
If you're lucky.
I was like, but fuck out of here. Like, I was just saddled with a bill. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't know that. And that's what I'm saying. Like, part of, you know, like, okay, federal government, you ought to be fucking ashamed of yourself. 'Cause that's some fucking bullshit right there. All right. So, you know what I mean? Like, that shit gets me nuts. You know what I mean? That, because I really do think sometimes that narrative is spun deeper. Either that or that it's allowed to perpetuate because it's beneficial right? You know what I mean? Like, it's like,
Yes.
okay, the machismo is,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, you know, we don't let each other know, that, you know what I mean? Because, you know, because we don't want, and then what ends up happening because of that is that, you know, it saves the Fed, you
Yeah.
know, a dime.
And I think a lot of it too is like half the battalion that I had deployed with, they were in Fallujah a couple years earlier, so they had been through this before.
Fallujah was fucking nuts.
There's documentaries about these
Yeah.
dudes, and they went through the ringer, and
Right.
so it's a lot of these, and this is who I deployed with, like guys with a lot of combat experience,
Right.
and that's something again, not people don't think about that with National Guard units is like. A lot
Oh,
of
yeah,
these,
you guys-
a lot of these
yeah.
dudes had more combat experience than a lot of the active duty
Right.
guys
Right.
that we were overseas with.
Right.
And so it's like those are the giants that I got to walk with. And so
Mm-hmm.
coming home, kind of answer that question, it's like, let's try to get out of here as quick as we can. Like, we just want to go home to our families. And because I had volunteered for this deployment, I actually didn't belong to that unit. So when I left a third of the 103rd, after my orders were done, I was back to another unit that didn't even deploy with me. By the time I got back to my home unit, a bunch of new people, half of them were coming back from the Sinai, some were on a deployment to Iraq, which is
So a lot of guys couldn't even really relate to what
yeah,
you
a lot
just.
of guys couldn't.
Yeah.
There was a few combat vets who had been in Iraq previously. A lot of them had already gotten
Was it?
out.
Did you feel like there was a disparity of understanding with the command or other individuals? Because sometimes you feel like, okay, they used to say in the Navy they call it like, you know, fleet sailors versus
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
know what I mean. You come back and you're like, you know, you're salty, right? You have, you know
there
what I mean?
was
Like,
definitely a little bit
yeah,
of it, especially with the
right.
younger dudes.
Right,
and,
right.
and some of the females that were coming out that had just gotten there from basic training and
Right.
AIT. And it's
Right.
just like, you know,
And
looking
any
like...
anxiousness to get in the shit, and you go, wait a minute, slow your motherfucking roll, right? Like, you don't even really know exactly what you're. It sounds really good in theory, but the reality
Yeah,
of
the
it is it's a
reality,
lot
it's-
fucking harder core than you might realize.
It's crazy. Like
Right.
witnessing stuff that humans aren't supposed to witness.
Right. Right.
And it really, I really began to kind of spin out of control during this time. I was really fortunate. Shortly after we got back, there was a few of us. There was like 5 of us from my battalion who had been on that deployment with me.
Right.
We got called into the XO's office, Major Ty, and he had been in Afghanistan, I think, like a year and a half prior with Special Forces.
Right.
And so he actually pulled us aside and was like, I'm not a mate. He pulled off his rank because we have Velcro.
Right.
I think it's probably still the same way. And he's like, I'm
Right.
not a major right now. But he's like, if you guys are struggling,
Right.
you guys need to talk to me, talk to somebody. He's like, I've been through this shit. I've been there.
Right.
And he pulled me aside because I think he could see that I was struggling a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said, you need to go to the VA. I was like, I'm fine, sir. I don't need to go to the VA. And then probably a month after that, a good buddy of mine was killed in Iraq, who I had done some recruiting with a couple years prior to that. And so I was actually detailed to be on the honor guard for that funeral. And I remember being in Souderton where the funeral was held, just being there for the viewing, and the major comes out and he's like, if you don't go to the VA, I'm going to kick your ass. By this time, I had been drinking a lot. I was joining the VFW. I was drinking probably 6-7 days a week, 6 days a week, take one day off.
Right.
And just really struggling. And my unit really saw that something was going on with me. And I just kept saying, I'm fine, I'm not going to go. Until shortly after that, after my buddy was killed, Mark Baum was killed in Iraq, my unit actually, I got called into the first sergeant's office. And he's like, you know, you're drinking a lot. I was like, yeah. And so he sent one of the NCOs over to my apartment at the time to confiscate all my booze. And it was just like, at that time, I was like, this is ridiculous. But looking back at it, all these years later, like I'm really thankful.
It's a life-saving
But
measure.
things didn't end there,
Oh,
right?
of course not.
Yeah.
Yeah,
just-
you weren't ready.
Yeah, I wasn't ready.
Yeah.
So shortly after that, I was just trying to find another way to kind of calm that pain, right? It's like, so you go from combat to the civilian world within like 2 weeks,
Right.
which is wild. Like it
Right.
shouldn't be that quick. At least if I was on active duty, it's like, hey, I'm with the same guys that I deployed with. I'd see
Right.
them every day.
You're all under the same stressors.
Yeah.
You're not faced, I think, like I said, some of the most painful thing that military, when they rotate into civilian life, deal with is the fact that feeling as though the world does not recognize. Right? You know what I mean? Like that's a very, it can, and I thought it was, it manifested as, these people take for granted what so many others, so many have sacrificed. But then again, I've come to understand over time that, that part of the freedom that people enjoy is the freedom of not understanding.
Yes.
Right. You know what I mean? Like at first I was bitter and resentful and angry over these people that, that just don't even really understand. And then you realize that, guys like you, that made sacrifices like that. So a guy can really think that fucking Memorial Day is about fucking hot dogs and hamburgers.
But again, it's like, I think it should be. Right?
Yeah.
After all these years later, it's like, I used to be like so angry. Oh, people.
But you have to transition through that point.
Yeah.
And getting help is key.
Yeah.
So.
And so it was like shortly after that, I enrolled in Montgomery County Community College. I was like, I'm going to go for psychology. And
MCC.
this is what I'm going to do.
I'm a Conshohocken boy,
Yeah.
so like that's the home front, right?
Yeah, and so I was there. I remember one of the first classes was a history class, and there's literally these long tables in these classrooms. And I think there was like 9 vets, and we all sat together. It was like
all
the
GI Bill
greatest
guys.
thing. Yep,
All using
GI
up
Bill
the
guys.
GI Bill, right?
Which is remind me to talk about the GI Bill and its shortfall in a
Right.
little bit.
Right.
But it was just really difficult. Again, I had been out of the war zone for less than a year, and I'm in community college.
Right.
Like this is the wildest
Might as well be the
thing.
fucking surface of the moon. Right.
And so I ended up changing my major because, with psych, I'm going to have to at least get a master's degree. I'm somebody who barely passed high school.
Right.
So I had a 2.33 GPA.
Right.
I think there was about 520.
I saw your bio on Immaculata College. How they helped. They handheld you to get through some difficult spots, which is really fucking cool. We'll get back to that.
I want to talk about that too.
Yeah.
So high school barely passed. 850 on the SATs, which is below.
Right.
I was so fascinated. I actually looked up what is an 850 on the SATs.
Right,
And it's like
right.
you get most questions wrong
Right.
on that. So I graduated literally end of my class. I think there's like 40 people that did worse than me.
Right.
And it's like, so college wasn't something that I ever wanted to do.
Right.
And so I was like, maybe I'll go for music. I'll go for human services with a focus on drug and alcohol counseling.
Right.
That way it's a associate's degree. I'll be done in 2 years.
Right.
So during this time, I dropped out a couple times. During this time, I was still in just a lot of mental health issues, a lot
Still
of
drinking
pain,
and all that other stuff.
Still drinking
Yeah,
a
right.
lot.
Okay.
Got into spice.
Okay.
Because spice is synthetic marijuana.
That shit is a fucking smoke spice. Spice is one of those things that's a fucking beatdown.
It is the worst thing.
Yeah.
But it's actually ended up saving my life.
Okay.
So I ended up smoking one night because it doesn't show up on drug tests, and I was still in the military at this
Zero
time.
tolerance policy is a motherfucker,
Zero
right?
tolerance.
Yeah, right.
But I was like in so much pain that I was like looking for something
Anything
to help. And so I ended up, I say I overdosed on it. And I remember smoking it, and the high just came on. But the high didn't stop. It kept coming like a freight train. And I was like, I got to like figure something out, put my head under cold water. Went to go lay down. I texted a buddy of mine. I was like, I think I'm dying. And I'm laying at my apartment at the time. Like I could see the front door. It was locked. I remember crawling over, unlocking the door for when he got there, he could come right in. And I remember crawling back onto the couch And I'm laying there. I have no control over my body. My arms are raising up in the air. My legs are raising. I'm like, man, this is not good.
Right.
And I remember getting a text from him. He's like, hey, the door's locked. And remember, I just said, like, I remember crawling over to
What did you do?
unlock the
Crawl over and
door.
lock the fucking door accidentally?
I don't even know if that was even real, if I had even
Right.
gotten out.
Right.
And so he was like, all right, I'm going to drive you to the hospital. And this time I'm like throwing up blood. And he's like, man, I got to call an ambulance. Ambulance came, picked me up, and took me to the ER. By that time I was fine. Got out. I actually went to therapy at the vet center the next day and talked to Alan. And he said, man, there's nothing else I can
It's
do.
so fucking cool that
Yeah.
that was your guy too, because he's the first
yeah.
guy I saw
Yeah.
in the VA outreach. The first time I ever went.
And he said, man, there's not much I can do for you. He's like, you need to go to an inpatient
Right.
program. And he said,
Right.
there's an awesome program at the Coatesville VA Hospital, a PTSD program. He's like, I'm going to call the director and we're going to get you in. And he ended up getting me in probably within a week. Went through an extensive interview process at the time to get in, just to make sure that, you know, whatever happened to me actually happened, and that I was actually, you know, had PTSD stuff going on. And they got me into the program. If it wasn't for Alan, he really demonstrated, looking back as a therapist now, is when somebody needs a higher level of care, you need to do that, right? It's the ethically
Instead
it's
of
what you
trying
need
to
do.
handle it
Try to
yourself,
handle it
right?
yourself.
Put somebody in the right environment.
Yeah. And he was a perfect example of that for me. I ended up in inpatient treatment where I would be in and out for several years, from 2010 to 2015. Just in and out, and I dropped out of school probably about 6 times throughout those years. And during my first stint at Coatesville, I ended up in the psych ward. And I was just having a really rough therapy session. During this time, a lot of this stuff I haven't even really opened up about to my family.
Right.
So this is an awesome experience to do this. But I started with suicidality for a long time.
Right.
I really struggled, and I just felt really suicidal after one of my sessions. And the psychologist that I was working with was like, we're going to have to check you in to the psych unit. So we went down to the urgent care area, got changed into pajamas, and I was like, hey, I just got to go smoke a cigarette. She's like,
you know what I'm saying?
yeah. But we had the cozy socks.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And so we walked outside, and I just start booking it.
Right.
And she's chasing after me, like, where are you going to go? And I stopped, and I'm like, anywhere but there. And she's like, it's not going to work that way.
No matter where you go, there you are, my brother.
Yeah. And so police came, and it's just protocol. They put you in the cop car, they drive you up and check you in, walk you into the psych unit. And so I get up there, worst couple days of my life. I was out of control. I'm just screaming, crying, being like, I don't belong in here.
Right. Because it's
And-
precisely where you belong.
Yeah, no, it was really difficult. So a nurse came in, a male nurse came in, and was like, hey, sign this form. I wouldn't sign anything. There was other people that approached me about this 72-hour release form, which is just a voluntary commitment, that I was voluntarily committing myself instead of being 302'd. I was like, I'm not signing anything. And so they sent in this male nurse who was a Navy vet. I don't even know his name. And he's like, hey, man, like, just sign this 72 hours. I think I went in like a Wednesday or a Thursday night, which meant 72 hours is up on the weekend, which they don't release people. But so shortly after that, a psychiatrist came in. I'm not going to mention his name. It was a rough start with the relationship with him. But
Just didn't
years
click.
later, so what ended up happening was he gave me some benzos. Really calmed me down, and I was good. So a couple days later, that Monday comes around, and there's a treatment team meeting And I was like, hey, like I'm ready to go. I already talked to the PTSD program. My psychologist over there, she said, oh yeah, you'll be able to come back. But this psychiatrist was like, oh, they'll never let you out. You know, they're not going to take you back. And I was like, well, I'm feeling good. There's meds that you gave me when I came in. They worked. He's like, I didn't give you anything. And I was like, well, I signed a 72-hour release form. So you have to let me out. I was like, you never signed anything. And for me, I was like, am I crazy? Like, am I literally crazy that I imagined all this stuff?
Right.
Eventually, they let me out, went back into the program, and shortly after that, probably got almost hooked on benzos. I abused benzos a lot. So that lasted for a couple years while I was in and out of the program. Dropping out of school, college a couple more times, and I was like, I'm done. Like, I'm not ever gonna go back to college. You know, I'm just gonna go to the VA for appointments every day, take my meds, and live this retired life. Shortly after this, I ended up getting med boarded, and I got medically retired from the Guard.
Okay.
And then so 2013, kind of fast forward, I was involved, or prior to that, I think 2012, I ended up being involved at Coatesville, had a intensive mental health outpatient program for people with severe mental health issues. So I was involved in that program for a bit. And the psychiatrist that I had was the one that I had in the psych unit.
The one that you butted heads with?
Yeah. Where he said, I never gave you anything. But we ended up having a really good relationship.
Did you ever address that conversation?
We did. So he ended up leaving the VA.
Right.
Which really kind of stung. It was like another loss for me of, man, this really sucks. So he ended up calling me, and he's like, hey, and we talked for about an hour and a half on the phone that night. And he said, I'm sorry for how we first met, everything that went down.
Right.
He's like, it shouldn't have happened like that. And it was okay. So during that time, I ended up getting interested in a service dog. So my psychologist in the inpatient program saw how I would interact with the dogs that would come on the unit.
Right.
And she said, oh, you should get a service dog. And then Alan says, oh, you should get a service dog. It's like, I don't want to get close to anything. Like, I don't want to have
the responsibility,
but then, you know, you get close, you get attached, and then they die.
Right.
And so for me, it was just like, that's not for me. But in 2013, I was like, I'm going to do it. So I applied for a dog from an organization called Puppies Behind Bars.
Okay.
Very strict organization. They're very selective. And so they train service dogs for Iraq and Afghanistan vets. And the dogs come fully trained. They're raised in prisons up in New York and Connecticut by inmates. And so the veterans would go up to work with the inmates for 2 weeks, learning the commands, how to take care of a dog. And they send us home with one. And her name was Annie. She's still around. She's retired. She's going to be 14 in March. A black lab.
God bless Annie.
Amazing, amazing girl. Saved my life. Taught me how to love again. How to be vulnerable, right? Dogs don't care. They'll love you no matter what, whether you're having a bad day, a good day. So it's like, I owe her so much. She works with my wife now, who's a therapist. So she'll go to work with my wife. Shortly after that, 2014, you know, I'm just kind of wandering through life, using benzos and abusing them and, you know, just living life. And then tragedy struck up in my area, and you probably heard about this. So one of my best friends that I knew from inpatient treatment at the VA, and then we were involved at the vet center, ended up going on a shooting spree. Killed his ex-wife, basically her whole family. Hit 3 locations one night, and this was a really difficult time. So the next morning I woke up just seeing, like, I had woken up in the middle of the night where I was living in Harleysville with my brother at the time, hearing sirens.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh,
Not
man,
knowing that
I was like, oh, something's going
yeah.
on. So I went back to sleep. But then the next morning, waking up and seeing, man, the shootings, like in Harleysville, and knowing some vets around. Oh, man, that's crazy. I got to take my dog out. So I grab my gun and just go out, like not knowing what's happening.
Right.
And then I get a call. I actually put the pieces together. I saw a Facebook post from, I don't want to mention his name, and he was like something talking about his kids. And I was like, oh, man. I was like, in my head, I was like, oh, shit. Like,
It was him.
it was him. And really within minutes, I get a call from this woman on the phone, like, hey, this is so-and-so from Montgomery County. We need you to come up to Pennsburg. There's a headquarters, I forget what they call it, like a headquarters of the police and stuff. And I was like, well, what's going on? And she's like, well, I can't tell you.
That's
I was like,
when you
well,
know.
I think
Right.
I know what's going
Yeah.
on, and there's no way I'm going to be able to drive up
Right.
there, the
Right.
20-minute drive, just with my mental health right now, once I'm figuring out what's going on.
Right.
And within, she's like, all right, we're going to call you back in 5 minutes. Hang up the phone. A minute later, I get a call from Montgomery County detectives. And like, we're here at your house. Like, oh yeah, I know you guys are coming. They're like, how do you know that we're coming to get you? And I was like, I don't know. Some lady called and like, well, we don't know who this lady is, but we're here to pick you up. And I'm like, I don't know like what I'm doing. And so I get into their car, and they actually drive me over to one of the locations. There's a survivor in the house. I didn't really find this out till a while later.
Jesus Christ.
I'm sitting in the SWAT vehicle, and guess who's in the SWAT vehicle? Alan.
Fuck out of here.
And so, yeah, and it's like, here's boom. They went into the house, threw a flashbang grenade, and I'm hearing all this going on. Like, man, this is so familiar.
Well, here's a strange question. So why snatch you up and bring you in? They wanted to have you talk to the guy,
yeah,
or
I think
in case
that's
there was
really
a possibility?
what was the
Right.
purpose
Yeah,
of that.
Right.
So they dropped me off at home once they found out it wasn't him. Again, I didn't know all this at the time, but they're like, all right, well, we're going to go. But I remember pulling up to that house in the back seat of the car, and news cameras all up and down the road. And
No, when you said it wasn't, when they found out it wasn't him.
there was another survivor.
Okay.
And so this was like a spiral. So they dropped me off at home, and with the small veteran community of friends that I have, somebody knew a veteran who was a Harley or a Lower Salford cop at the time. And he came to my house. He was off duty at the time, but was going on shift in a couple hours. And he took me out to one of the local restaurants, and we just kind of sat there. And I just remember at the Harleysville Hotel, just like being in tears, just like, I can't believe it's going on. And it's on the TV screens.
Right.
And he just turned off the news and was with me for that time. And I ended up dropping me off at home because he had to go to work. And that evening, he sends me a text, hey, man, I got to come get you. So he picked me up. Him and another officer came to my house, and with Annie, we got in. He patted me down. My dog and I got back into the car, drove me to the police station, where I slept on the floor. And just not knowing what's going on. And he gave me this number to a lady named Heather Slawinski, who was running a crisis hotline for veterans. At the time, it was with Operation Ward 57. I said, he's like, hey, man, here's a number. She's good people. Text her. Like, just let her know she knows about what's going on. And so I reached out to her, and she was just there when I needed her. And that relationship would really blossom into kind of what I do now, but not to get ahead of ourselves. But she was there for me that night. I got dropped off at home. A couple days later, we found out he took his life, and that was another loss. And the psychologist I had at the PTSD program reached out to me and was like, hey, you need to really come in. We're going to make it possible for you to come in. I was like, well, I'm using benzos again, and they don't allow that in inpatient treatment. And, a lot of people talk a lot of like shit about the VA. Coesville VA, like, literally saved my life. And she was like, I'm going to talk to the director of this program, Dr. Whitney. He's retired now, but he went, talked to hospital, like the higher ups, and said, hey, we need to wean this guy off. Instead of having him go to the substance abuse treatment unit to detox off benzos, we're going to wean him off, which had never happened in that program. So they got me into that program. During this whole time, I had lost a lot of friends from overdoses, suicide, guys that I was in treatment with all those years. And so the last time I was in treatment, they pulled me right in and made sure I was good. I ended up leaving AMA against medical advice. I just snuck out.
A trash bag with
Yeah.
your shit in it.
So I actually packed up and just left one morning. And I said, like, I can't keep doing this. So I went home, and a couple months later, I was taking Ambien to sleep. Ambien wasn't working, so I figured out, if I drink a little bit with Ambien, I'll be able to sleep. Well, ended up drinking a whole bottle of Southern Comfort one night while on Ambien, and I'm hallucinating. Luckily, I was able to text a buddy of mine, Eric, as a Marine Corps vet, Afghanistan vet, and he came to my house, picked me up, made sure I was good. I don't know what I would have done if he hadn't been there. I could have, I was like in real bad shape. So he probably could have saved my life. And fast forward, got myself together and started volunteering with Operation Ward 57 on the crisis hotline during that time.
Now, when you say got yourself together, got clean?
Yeah, stopped drinking for the most part. Every once in a while, I'll drink occasionally. But I kind of had this game with the VA where they stopped prescribing me benzos. So I went to an outside prescriber, and I told the psychiatrist at the VA, I was like, hey, man, if you guys prescribe this to me, you can monitor me. But where I'm out now with an outside psychiatrist, like, you're not going to be able to monitor me. So they ended up re-prescribing them to me, and I never used them. So it's kind of this, like, I had to be, I'm headstrong. So it's like I won that battle, and I was able to get to a point where I could use them if I needed them. So I would have very severe panic attacks for, like, many years afterwards.
Right.
Which kind of stemmed back from the first 4th of July home from being overseas with fireworks. And I was with my family, and I was like trying to dig a hole, just crying. So that was kind of the first one that I experienced.
So now you end up doing, how do you find your way to back to school then?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I was actually a director of a nonprofit for a little bit, working with veterans in a transition home. And a lot of issues going on with that nonprofit at the time. And
issues? Say more.
Just mismanagement from the board of directors. And I don't want to,
Yeah, right. Okay.
talk a little bit more about that. But I was just in this place where it's like, I'm going to see what else I can get, what other director positions. And I was noticing, well, a lot of places need degrees, and I don't have one.
Right.
So I was like, I guess I'll go back to school. During this time, I had met my wife online. She's a therapist, been working in the field for a while. We kind of connected over that. And so I went back to school at Immaculata University in
My wife is an
2017.
Immaculata alumni as well. She got a BSN at Immaculata.
Yeah, so if it wasn't for Immaculata, I would never have graduated.
Right.
I was still like struggling. Like I said, I had really severe panic attacks.
Right.
And during this time, I got engaged. We were buying a house, pressure of schoolwork. Literally probably every time I was on campus commuting, I would have really severe panic attacks. And the one time there was this nun, Sister Judith. I remember sitting outside her class, and I was just not in good shape. And right outside the classroom, there's just some steps. I'm sitting there. She comes out, and I'm not Catholic. I was never around. Like, I had this perception of nuns are these mean old ladies that slap
evil,
people with rulers.
Right. Yeah, right. We've all heard those stories too.
So, but she sat next to me, and she like just went on to like check in with me to make sure that I was okay. And then she started to share about her life, and she had some health issues that she struggled with, and which caused some mental health stuff. And she's like, I'm going to talk to the dean of the program. I'm going to talk to everybody at the president of the school. And we're going to work this out, that if you don't feel like you can make it a full day of being in school, then do not come. And we're going to make sure that you get your work. We're going to make sure that, you are taken care of. During this time, I would literally be pulled out of class because I would have panic attacks. Like the therapist that I had at Immaculata, who ran the counseling center, would come in on her day off. She would get a call, and she would come right to the school, come find me, crying in an office. I'm like, man, like, I just want to get a degree, because I was really struggling too at this point of like, I had this mindset of like, I hadn't accomplished anything because I didn't have a stupid piece of paper. But that was like what I wanted so bad, was like this piece of paper where I could feel like I accomplished something.
Right.
And
not to mention that you had accomplished many things, my friend.
Which I'm very easy to minimize.
You and I share that in common.
Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah, and then I was involved in this adult program at Immaculata, and my counselor, the counselor, or the advisor, I should say, Kate Kaminsky, I actually just found out a couple weeks ago she passed away from cancer over the summer. But she would meet me once a week and just talk to me about what's going on, and the level of support that I had from Immaculata. Like I said, if it wasn't for them, I would never have graduated.
Right.
And during this time, it was like I got really connected with psychology, and I really like kind of fell in love. I'll deny it even to this day that I fell in love with school. I grew up like saying I hate school, but I think I like it.
Found something interesting.
Yeah.
Something compelling.
Yeah.
Or,
so I was able to finish my bachelor's in 2 years. And it was
that's
just
the dance. See,
yeah.
This is why we do this, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
we danced all around the edge of the volcano for a while, actually.
Yeah.
And then the dance is, what do we do next?
Yeah. So it's like I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to become a psychologist, because I wanted to be like the psychologist who saved my life in treatment.
Right.
And this is something I talked about for years. And I was like, I'll never get it, because like I'll never get a degree.
Right.
And so there I was. I finished that. I applied to some doctoral programs.
You're working on your doctorate right now.
Right now.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So some programs allow bachelor's admit, so people with a bachelor's degree to get into a doctoral program to become a psychologist.
Okay.
And then without
what's
having
that
to get
like?
a
So you don't have to you bypass the master's altogether.
So
through
they
this
would get
program?
one within like in the first 2 years of a doctoral program.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a 60 credit master's, which in order to be a mental health therapist in Pennsylvania, you need a 60 credit master's degree. But I didn't have the GPA.
Right.
During that time to get into one of those programs. So I ended up got my master's degree in clinical and counseling psych with a trauma focus from Chestnut Hill College.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And you have practice in Chestnut Hill, right?
I do. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I have a practice in Chestnut Hill. I have an office in Chestnut Hill, and then also in Washington Square downtown.
Okay. I did business many years with Tallulah's right there.
It's a
Amy
beautiful
Olexi's
area.
my homegirl. So she's got a Tallulah's table right here in Kennett. So
That's awesome.
yeah. So if I know you're down there, I'll come check you out one of these days.
Yeah, so I work a lot with vets. I have a really great team of like about 12 clinicians who work with me, and it's just amazing people, all different walks of life. I work a lot with veterans, like clientele-wise, who are veterans, first responders, start seeing teenagers. And during this time, during my master's degree, I ended up doing a rotation for internship and practicum at Eagleville Hospital, working in a detox unit.
Right.
So it was like, that was like kind of a war zone in its own, especially with
right.
COVID kicking off during that time. Navigating that. But detox was a really rough place to kind of work as a therapist.
Yeah. It's the fucking trenches.
Yeah.
It's not the trenches over there. It's the trenches over here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, during this time, again, it's like I'm struggling with panic attacks and trying to navigate my own way while going to therapy at the same time. And ended up, I was really kind of down. I don't want to take up a whole lot of time, but really kind of really down. Like, it really affected my wife and I. It's just hard to do things.
You mean your mental state while you're going through this? Sure.
Like, yeah, for years, just with the panic attacks, like, it ruined a lot of different things for us. Like, one night we're going out for our anniversary and end up in the hospital because I'm fighting a panic attack. Just can't shake it. I mean, I was in the ER multiple times because of this. And I just remember this one day, I was just laying on the couch, just really having a hard time. And she's like, hey, like, she brings up, she's like, I've been reading about this thing called the Stellate Ganglion block. And I think this is something that you need to try. And one of the Medal of Honor winners, Dakota Meyer, had gotten this done. There was a 60-minute special on it. And she showed it to me, and it was like these doctors down in Annapolis, Maryland, they're injecting a local anesthetic into the neck, coating the stellate ganglion nerves. And what that really does for...
Anesthetic, say more. Is it like
so it's
ketamine,
like something that they
like
would give you at the dentist's office.
Oh, really? Okay.
And so what it does is it coats the nerves, it wears out of your body within 8 hours, but what this does is it essentially resets the brain. And I was like, I'm not a big needle person. I mean, I got tattoos, but but I'm like
not me. I don't know.
I'm not like a shot person. Like, I don't like
especially the fucking needles.
neck. Yeah. So, but they use a ultrasound to guide the needle in. So I was like, I don't know about this, but I'm willing to give it a shot.
Fucking right. If you've been suffering that long and that hard, right?
Therapy, which it was amazing. I still go to therapy, benzos, medication. But it was to this place where it's like, this is the last option that I have. Like, I'm really struggling. So we get an appointment set up. I think it was like the week later. So we go down to Annapolis, Maryland. I'm having a hell of a time trying
now, where
to
do you go
make
in
it.
Annapolis? Are you at the fucking...
So there's two doctors, both veterans, Dr. Mulvaney and Dr. Lynch. They've done most of the research on the stellate ganglion block for PTSD. Both of them, like I said, special operations dudes. And probably 99% of the research for the effect of the stellate ganglion block. So the stellate ganglion block has been used for about 100 years for pain,
right?
But they're noticing over the years that it affects mental health. It's still considered experimental for mental health, even though it's FDA approved for pain.
Right.
So insurance won't cover it and all this. So anyway, I walk down into this office in Annapolis. I'm like, oh man, like I could barely make it. I am like full-blown panic mode at this time. And I go up, I go lay down. The procedure is fairly quick. Go in, meet the doc, and say, hey, this is what's going on. This is what it does. Lay you down. They numb the area, and then they inject you. And when I say, like, within a minute, 2 minutes at max, that I was crying in tears because it felt like 1,000,000 pounds was just lifted off of my shoulders. It was like for the first time since before I deployed that I felt calm. I felt so relaxed. And it wasn't an artificial
Well, so here's the thing, like, and this is so things you don't know about me.
Yeah.
So my parents were hypnotists. So Dinardo and Dinardo Hypnotherapy in Lafayette Hill. So I grew up with probably an awareness of the subconscious mind when most people were like, what? You know what I mean? Like had no concept behind it. So, you know, whereas some people think about things that are psychosomatic as fake, sometimes I think that, you know, sometimes the trigger that the subconscious needs is a pivoting point that tells you that this is a before and after state, right? Yeah. And whether it has a medical effect or not doesn't really matter if you get the medical result out of it because your subconscious realizes that still, who gives a fuck, right? It worked. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, we don't have to evaluate. It's fucking fantastic.
It's really a breakthrough treatment for PTSD. And again, it's not a substance that's in your body. It doesn't make you high. Right. It literally just resets your brain. It's like back in the day when you would your computer froze, fantastic. You unplug it, plug it back in. And for some people, it's a one and done. For me,
Did you go back?
3 of them.
3 of them?
I've had 3 of them. The last time that I was there was 2.5 years ago.
Did they hit you big money? Like what
so
because you said it's not covered by your insurance
at cost. So they were doing like $1,200, $800. It was like $800 discounted for vets.
Because there are veterans hearing this right now.
Yeah.
That are fucking like. So now you understand why the fuck we're doing this.
Yeah. Right? And this is so important. That's why I really want to talk about this, because it's life-changing for me. Because of this, I've been able to go through so much over the last couple of years. So the last time that I went in, over 2.5 years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, they realized that doing 2 injections would actually cause the effect to last longer, and this is just part of the research that they've continued to do.
You mean 2 injections at the same time? What, both sides of the neck at the same time?
So now they do both sides of the neck. Before, the last time that I was in, they were just kind of realizing that 2 injections.
What kind of effect in terms of length of treatment? How long is it lasting for?
So for me, I haven't had to go back in over 2.5 years. I've had 1 panic attack, in 2.5 years, and kind of get into what I do now, right? So I'm a doctoral student back at Immaculata, working on my doctorate in psychology to be a psychologist. I work, so part of this process, 6-year program, right? Even to get into a doctoral program, I wouldn't have been able to deal with the panic attacks to even want to do this.
Right.
So part of the process that I'm in now is like we have 3 years of clinical rotations. They call it a practicum. So last year I got picked up. So one of the things that I've been doing, besides owning a business, running a business, being
just
a
couple
therapist,
things, my brother.
Being a full-time student, having practicum, is I am on an advisory board for the University of Pennsylvania that works with, we're an advisory board where we kind of work on different projects that revolve around PTSD, suicidality, traumatic brain injuries, things like that. And so one of the projects that came to us was in West Philadelphia at Penn Presbyterian Hospital. As they started a gun violence program, working with gunshot victims in the city. And so for a year, my clinical rotation was working in the trauma center in West Philadelphia, working with gunshot victims.
Trauma center in West Philly.
So Penn Presbyterian.
Yeah. Okay.
So we would follow individuals literally within minutes of arriving at the trauma center, and then follow them through their stay at the hospital and then for outpatient therapy. So again, looking at this, reminds me of stuff I witnessed in Afghanistan.
Of course.
But I'm not having a response that I normally would have had. So if it wasn't for the injection, the stellate ganglion block, there's no way I would have been able to function in that environment.
Wow.
So working in that environment this year, it's amazing. And whatever I say here does not represent the views of Penn, or it doesn't represent the views of the VA. This is just me speaking this stuff. But I am doing work too at the VA. So I work at Penn again this year, working with psychosis, individual psychosis, a lot of similar stuff that I went through. And then I'm also working at the VA in Coatesville, working biofeedback, actually working with a lot of the guys in the same program that I was a patient of for years. So it's like this full circle type of situation. And then, so kind of going back to Stellate Ganglion block, that's so much effective. I've known countless other individuals, veterans who have had this done. So Operation Ward 57, the program that I talked about earlier with the crisis hotline, they kind of closed down shop. And Heather, the same woman that I texted during the shooting incidents, so we co-founded an organization called the Honor and Courage Foundation.
Right.
We still have the crisis hotline. But one of the programs that we have is where we sponsor veterans to get the Stellate Ganglion block.
How do I get involved?
So you can check us out, the Honor and Courage Foundation online. Just shoot us a message on there.
Okay.
We do a 5K every...
What's the website?
I believe it's the honorandencouragefoundation.org.
Okay.
Something I should know off the top of my head, but I have so much stuff going on.
Dean will make sure that it gets posted in the description. So.
And we've already helped countless number of veterans already be able to afford this. And so one of the doctors that we use is Dr. Lynch. So there's two practices now down in Annapolis. So we'll send individuals to see Dr. Lynch, who's doing this, and we'll help cover the cost of it.
Fantastic. That was fucking awesome.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, cool. I appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you.
I love you.
An honor to be here.
Thank you. That's what's up. I got a nice fist pound there. Wow. Dancing on a volcano yet again. And just when you think it couldn't get any better, it does. I appreciate you, my friend.
I appreciate you.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah, thank
right?
you.
Thank you for your continued service. Okay. And thank you for a message of hope. Right. And, like I said before we started this, if it helps one person, right, then we've met our objectives. Well, it certainly has, because it helped me. And, the neat thing about what we do is these messages live on in perpetuity. That's the one wonderful thing about leverage, is that, this conversation lives on and may live on long after one or both of us are even gone. And it's a story that I don't think I'm guessing has probably been told at this level. I got that sensation while we were paddling into the wave. Yeah. Right. And, I think it's worth hearing. It certainly was worth hearing for me. And I think, hopefully there's some other veterans that hear this and decide to get some help. And, are there any other resources that you could think as a veteran that you should look into? You're jammed up right now, and you're like, "What the fuck do I do? Do you call the hotline?
Call the hotline, and Heather runs it. I'm back up now on it, but she has so many connections all over the country. Whatever you're struggling with, she's there. She'll
now that's the hotline you're affiliated with, right? Which organization is that?
That's the Honor and Courage Foundation.
The Honor and Courage Foundation
it's
hotline?
24 hours, 7 days a week. She will literally be up all night talking with vets.
Okay, so that number is also going to be posted in the description for this video as well. So I love you and I appreciate you, my friend.
Love you
for
too,
coming
brother.
out. And honored and privileged to call you a friend now. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate. Make sure I'm in your fucking speed dial.
Definitely.
Thanks, man. There we go. We got